The air in Sorrento, Italy, smelled of salt and crushed lemons. It was early evening, and the light over the Tyrrhenian Sea was turning the water a bruised shade of violet. This was the trip my late husband Walter and I had mapped out down to the hour before a sudden stroke took him from me. For the first time in years, sitting alone on that terrace, I felt a fragile sense of peace. Then my phone buzzed against the wrought iron table. It was a fraud alert from my bank, the screen illuminated with a single glaring line, card ending in 4092. Charge authorized, $2,684. Bellwether House Restaurant, Pennsylvania. I stared at the number. I was over 4,000 miles away from Pennsylvania. I hadn't used that card since I booked my flights. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. My 17-year-old granddaughter, Mia, had sent me a video message. I tapped the screen to play it. The camera panned across a long, private dining room. The table was draped in heavy white linen and crowded with crystal glasses, silver chargers, and massive centerpieces of white peonies. Sitting dead center in the seat of honor was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law's mother. The camera continued to pan, showing 16 guests. My son, Nathan, stood at the head of the table, holding a glass of champagne. He looked sharp, successful, and deeply satisfied with himself. "I just want to say a few words," Nathan announced in the video, his voice echoing slightly in the private room. The guests quieted down. My mother couldn't be here tonight. But when she heard we were planning this, she insisted on treating all of us. She wanted every mother in this family to feel truly special today. The room erupted into applause. Vanessa pressed a hand to her chest, looking genuinely moved. Nathan smiled and raised his glass, soaking in the admiration of his wife's family, as if he were a benevolent king bestowing charity upon his subjects. A text bubble from Mia popped up beneath the video. "Grandma, did you really offer to pay for all of this?" I didn't type immediately. I let the video loop. I looked at the flowers, the wine, the smiles, and then I typed back, "No, sweetheart. I didn't even know there was a dinner. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the sudden, crushing weight of panic that used to seize my chest whenever my family disappointed me. Instead, I looked at the $2,684 transaction alert. I remembered something Walter used to say when he inspected the foundation of an old house. He was a carpenter and a contractor, a man who believed in the absolute truth of physics. "A thing can look perfectly straight for years, Eleanor," he would tell me, tapping the side of a wall. "People will swear up and down that it's holding weight, but the brass level always knows the truth." I opened my banking app. I navigated past my checking account, past my savings, and tapped into the emergency credit line. I scrolled down to the authorized users list. I found Nathan's name. My thumb hovered over the screen for only a fraction of a second before I pressed remove. I took a sip of my mineral water. The ice was melting, but the water was still cold. I watched Mia's video a second time, but this time I wasn't looking at Nathan. I was counting 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted the plates. I counted the sets of silverware. I counted the heavy linen napkins folded into swans. 16. There were exactly 16 people in the room, and there were exactly 16 place settings at the table. There was no empty chair. They had not planned a dinner and forgotten to invite me. They had not assumed I wouldn't want to come. They had carefully, meticulously planned a dinner for 16 people, knowing from the very beginning that I would not be one of them. The true pain of the betrayal wasn't just the exclusion. The pain was the theft of my identity. Nathan wasn't just ignoring his mother on Mother's Day. He was actively using my financial power to buy loyalty and admiration from his wife's family. He had taken my money to buy the peonies, and he had taken my name to buy the applause. My money and my name were sitting right there in the middle of that room, working for him, while the woman who actually owned them was erased entirely. I put the phone face down on the table. I wasn't going to call him, not yet. I needed to look at the entire foundation of this mess before I brought a sledgehammer to it. I opened my transaction history and set the filter for the last 24 months. The Bellwether House restaurant wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. It was just the final cracked beam in a house that had been leaning for a very long time. 2 years ago, the silence in my house after Walter's funeral had been deafening. Nathan had stepped in to help with the arrangements, acting the part of the dutiful son. But I knew he was struggling. He worked in medical device sales, and his company had recently gutted their commission structure. He had a mortgage, 2 growing daughters, and a wife who had grown accustomed to a certain standard of living. The first request had been entirely reasonable. Lucy, my youngest granddaughter, had severe chronic allergies. Her specialty medication wasn't fully covered by their new insurance plan, and Nathan had sounded exhausted on the phone. "I don't know how we're going to swing this month, Mom," he had said. I didn't hesitate. I paid for the medication. A month later, it was Mia's braces. Then, in the dead of February, their furnace broke down. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table, sliding a silver credit card across the wood to him. "Nathan," I had said, my voice gentle but firm, "I know things are tight right now. I want you to have this as an authorized user, but I need you to understand something. This card is for the girls. It is for medical needs, and it is for absolute emergencies. It is not for daily life." He had looked at me with what I thought was genuine gratitude. "I know, Mom. Thank you. I swear I'll only use it when we really need it." He stuck to the rules for the first 3 months. The charges were small and easily verifiable: a copay at the pediatrician, a pharmacy run. But then the boundary began to slip. So quietly, I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. It started with a $65 charge at a gas station. "I left my wallet at the house, Mom. I'm so sorry," he told me. I let it go. 2 weeks later, a $150 charge at a steakhouse. "I was taking a client out. The company card declined. I'll pay you back on Friday." Friday came and went, and the money never appeared. Then came a $400 deposit for a boutique hotel, expensive sports gear for Mia that they didn't need, a weekend getaway to the Poconos that I only found out about when I saw Claire posting pictures on social media. I hadn't been invited to the Poconos, but I had certainly paid for the room. There was always an excuse. Every charge came wrapped in a desperate, beautifully constructed justification. He was stressed. He was trying to keep his marriage intact. He was trying to give the girls a normal childhood despite his pay cut. None of the charges individually were big enough to justify starting a family war. But added together week after week, month after month, they formed a system of extraction. And I had let it happen. I had to admit that to myself, sitting there on the Italian coast. I had let it happen because I was terrified. I had spent my entire life as a mother and a wife. With Walter gone, I was terrified of being irrelevant. I realized that my money had become a toll bridge to my own family. When I paid the bills without complaining, Nathan called me. He would ask about my day. He would bring the girls over for an hour on a Sunday. He would make me feel like I was still the matriarch of the family. But whenever I questioned a charge, whenever I hesitated, the bridge closed. He would suddenly become swamped with work. The phone wouldn't ring for 2 weeks. The girls would be too busy with homework to visit. He never said it out loud. He never said, "Pay up or you won't see your grandchildren." He was far too sophisticated for that. He just trained me. He trained me to understand that my value to him was entirely financial. And if I wanted the illusion of a loving son, I had to keep the account open. While I was slowly being pushed to the margins of my own family, another woman was taking my place. Vanessa, Claire's mother, was everywhere. When looked at the photos on Claire's social media, Vanessa was at every school play. She was at every birthday party. She was at the Sunday dinners, the trips to the lake, the awards ceremonies. Whenever I asked why I hadn't been told about an event, Nathan always had an excuse ready. They were weapons disguised as concern. "It's a really long drive for you, Mom. We didn't want to tire you out. The restaurant was going to be packed. We thought it would be too noisy for you. It was just a small thing. Mom, we know you don't like dealing with crowds." He was weaponizing my age. He was taking my 71 years and using them as a shield to keep me away. He made my exclusion look like it was a favor to me, a way of protecting my delicate health. Meanwhile, I was still driving myself to the grocery store. I maintained my own garden. I had packed my own bags and driven myself to the airport at 4 in the morning to fly to Italy alone. I was not fragile, but Nathan needed me to be fragile because a fragile woman doesn't ask why she isn't invited to the dinners she pays for. I looked out at the darkening sea. Walter's voice echoed in my head again. "Walls rarely lean overnight, Eleanor. They shift in fractions of an inch, a 16th of an inch here, an eighth of an inch there. You don't even notice the house is settling until one day the front door just doesn't close anymore." My family had been tilting for 2 years. The Mother's Day dinner wasn't the wind that blew the house down. It was just the moment the front door finally jammed shut. I picked up my phone. The 2,684 charge was still pending. I didn't cancel it immediately. I wanted the restaurant to run the card. I wanted Nathan to stand there at the end of his glorious dinner, slightly drunk on champagne and borrowed admiration, and hand the waiter a piece of plastic that no longer worked. I opened the notes app on my phone and began to type. I was going to need my lawyer. The next morning, the Mediterranean sun was blindingly bright against the white stucco of my hotel balcony. I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service and sat down at the small iron table with my iPad and a worn, leather-bound notebook. It was Walter's old project estimating ledger. He had used it to calculate the exact cost of lumber, copper piping, and drywall for every house he ever built or remodeled. I was using it to calculate the exact cost of my relationship with my son. I drew a sharp line down the middle of a blank page. I divided the ledger into 2 distinct columns. I titled the first column Part A. This was the money I had given voluntarily, knowingly, and willingly. I scrolled through 2 years of bank statements, carefully copying down the dates and the amounts. Lucy's allergy medications, Mia's orthodontic bills, the emergency furnace repair in the dead of winter, a missed mortgage payment when Nathan's commission check was delayed. I wrote down every single one of those charges. I didn't feel a shred of regret as my pen moved across the paper. That was what family was supposed to do. I was a mother and a grandmother, and providing a safety net when my family was falling was a privilege I was grateful to afford. Then I titled the second column Part B. This column was different. This was the money that had been taken, not given. These were the hidden charges, the quiet slips of the boundary, the expenses that had been obscured by beautifully constructed lies. I wrote down the $400 deposit for the boutique hotel. I wrote down the weekend getaway to the Poconos. I wrote down the expensive dinners out with his clients that he swore he would reimburse me for on Friday. I wrote down the high-end sports gear for Mia that they didn't actually need, and the anniversary jewelry he had bought for Claire, jewelry he had proudly told her he purchased with his end-of-year bonus. He hadn't used a bonus. He had used my emergency credit line. I spent 2 hours combing through every single line item on my statements, verifying dates and locations. When I finally reached the bottom of the page, I tallied the columns. Over the course of 24 months, my son had extracted nearly $46,000 from my accounts. But it was the breakdown that mattered. Part A, the genuine emergencies, the medical bills, the things I had explicitly agreed to, amounted to roughly $34,200. Part B, the lies, the ego trips, the stolen luxuries, totaled almost $11,800. I sat back in my chair and stared at the numbers. I wasn't tallying them to punish him. I wasn't going to demand interest, and I wasn't going to take him to court. I was tallying them to stop lying to myself. Walter had always told me that an estimate doesn't hold a moral judgment. It doesn't decide who is a good person or a bad person. It simply tells you, in cold, undeniable mathematics, what the house is actually costing you to keep standing. My son was costing me $11,800 in lies, but the money wasn't even the worst part. As I reviewed the statements one last time, my eyes caught a peculiar charge from 3 months prior. It was a $250 fee paid to a company called Silvercrest Advisory. The name didn't ring a bell. I had Googled it right there on my balcony. My stomach had dropped into a cold, hollow pit when the search results loaded. It was an elder care placement and asset management agency. I had never spoken to them. I had never requested their services. I remembered making a phone call to them a few weeks before my trip. I had dialed their office, putting on my sweetest, most confused elderly woman voice. I told the receptionist I was Eleanor Hayes, and I was just calling to confirm if I had an upcoming appointment because my memory had been a bit foggy lately. The receptionist had been incredibly polite. "Oh no, Mrs. Hayes, you don't have an appointment," she had said brightly. "We've only been dealing with your son, Nathan. He requested a full informational packet to be mailed to his office." I had kept my voice perfectly steady. "Oh, how wonderful of him. Could you remind me what was in the packet, just so I can be prepared when he brings it up?" "Ah, of course," the receptionist had chirped. "He requested our comprehensive guide on assisted living facilities in your area, a preliminary valuation packet for the sale of your current property, and the necessary legal forms to invoke a financial power of attorney in the event that you no longer wish to manage your own affairs." I had thanked her and hung up the phone. I hadn't cried then either. I had just sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Nathan couldn't sell my house yet. He didn't have the legal authority. But he was already laying the groundwork. He was already researching the legal mechanisms required to declare me unfit, take control of my assets, sell the home Walter and I had built, and use the equity to fund whatever lifestyle he felt he deserved. The terrifying part wasn't that he had executed the plan. The terrifying part was that he truly believed it was a reasonable thing to do. He viewed my home not as my sanctuary, but as an unliquidated asset that was inconveniently occupied by his mother. 6 weeks before this trip to Italy, I had driven downtown to visit my lawyer, Helen Brooks. Helen and Walter went way back. She had handled the closing on every property Walter ever built. I had sat in her leather chairs and told her that Nathan was becoming a little too insistent about handling my paperwork. Helen, sharp and pragmatic as ever, had immediately drafted a series of defensive documents. She drew up papers to revoke the old financial power of attorney I had given Nathan years ago. She drafted an amendment to remove him as the executor of my will, replacing him with an independent trust management firm. She even created a mechanism to shield the equity of my house. But I hadn't signed them. The documents had been sitting in a manila envelope on my desk for 6 weeks. I had wanted to believe I was overreacting. I had wanted to believe that Nathan was just being overly protective, that the elder care brochure was just him planning for a distant, hypothetical future. I had desperately wanted to preserve the illusion that I had a son who loved me more than he loved my bank account. The Mother's Day dinner video was the final piece of evidence. It shattered the illusion completely. Sitting in Sorrento, with the $2,684 restaurant charge still pending on my screen, I built my fence. I opened my email and found the secure portal link Helen had sent me weeks ago. I downloaded the PDFs. Using the stylus on my iPad, I signed every single one of them. I revoked the power of attorney. I removed him as executor. I assigned the independent trust. I emailed the executed documents back to Helen with a single line of text. File them immediately. Next, I opened my banking app. I had already removed him as an authorized user, but I went further. I changed every password to every account I owned. I disabled the secondary digital access he had set up on his phone to help me check my balances. I called the bank's fraud department and placed a verbal lock on my accounts, explicitly stating that no one, especially my son, was authorized to make changes or request information without me physically present in a branch. Finally, I drafted a second email to Helen. I asked her to type up a short, clinical legal letter and send it to Nathan via certified mail. I didn't want the letter to sound angry. I didn't want it to carry threats or dramatic declarations of betrayal. I simply wanted it to state the new reality of his existence. It would inform him that he held no access to any of my accounts. It would notify him that he held no authority over my state or my medical decisions. It would state in clear legal terms that my home was solely in my name and that any future actions taken in my name required my direct notarized consent. I don't want to punish him, Helen. I typed in the email. I just want him to stop living like my permission is his inheritance. There was only one last leak to plug. I knew exactly how Nathan would react when the financial wall slammed down in front of him. He wouldn't apologize. He would pivot. He would try to use Mia and Lucy as human shields. I could already hear the script he would use. He would call me, his voice dripping with manufactured heartbreak. You're punishing your own granddaughters because you're mad at me. How are we going to pay for Lucy's allergy shots now, Mom? You're hurting the girls. I was not going to let him weaponize the children I loved. I moved first. In my email to Helen, I instructed her to immediately establish a dedicated medical and educational trust for Mia and Lucy. I transferred a sizable amount of money into it. enough to cover their tuition, their medical needs, and any emergencies for the next 5 years. But I structured it with a steel trap. The trust was designed as a direct pay system. Nathan and Claire could not withdraw a single dollar of cash from it. If Lucy needed medication, the trust paid the pharmacy directly. If Mia needed braces, the trust paid the orthodontist. If there was a tuition bill, the trust paid the school. Nathan could no longer use his daughter's needs to extort deposits into his checking account. If he truly only cared about providing for his girls, the trust would be a relief to him. If he was using their expenses as a cover to siphon cash for himself, the trust would infuriate him. I closed my iPad and took a deep breath of the Italian air. I felt lighter than I had in 2 years. I hadn't taken my grandchildren out of my heart. I had simply taken their father off my signature. And now there was nothing left to do but wait for him to try and pay the bill for his 16 guests. My phone rang exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes later. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I knew exactly what was happening at that very moment 4,000 miles away. The dessert plates had been cleared. The coffee had been served. The waiter had discreetly presented the leather folio containing the bill for a party of 16 at a high-end restaurant. Nathan had confidently slipped my silver emergency credit card into the folio, perhaps making a joke to Vanessa about how he was happy to treat the family. The waiter had walked away to the register, and a few minutes later he had returned, leaned down, and whispered those deeply embarrassing words into Nathan's ear. "Sir, the card has been declined." I let the phone ring 3 times before I answered it. "Mom?" Nathan's voice was a tight, panicked hiss. In the background, I could hear the muted clatter of silverware and the low hum of restaurant chatter. He had stepped out into the hallway near the restrooms so his guests wouldn't hear him. "Hello, Nathan," I said. I was looking out at the Amalfi Coast, watching the headlights of small cars winding along the distant cliffs. "Mom, what is going on with the card?" he demanded, his voice cracking with stress. "The waiter just came back. It declined. I called the bank and they said the account was locked and I wasn't an authorized user. Did you do this?" "I did," I replied. My voice was entirely flat. "Are you insane?" he hissed, abandoning the dutiful son act entirely. "Do you know how this makes me look? I have Claire's entire extended family sitting out there. I just gave a toast. I have to pay this bill right now." "Unlock it, Mom. You're embarrassing me." "I am not embarrassing you, Nathan," I said evenly. "I did not invite 16 people to a dinner I could not afford to pay for. I simply stopped paying for a dinner I didn't know existed." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The panic in his voice shifted into defensive anger. He fell back on the same manipulative script he had used for 2 years. "You always say family is more important than money," he spat. "You always said you just wanted us to be together." "I do," I agreed, "which is why you should have invited your mother to the dinner instead of just inviting her credit card." I realized I wasn't backing down, so he pivoted to his ultimate weapon. "Mia and Lucy are out there, Mom," he said, his voice dropping into a register of manufactured heartbreak. "They're asking about you. What am I supposed to tell them? You're ruining Mother's Day for them." "They have my cell phone number," I said, entirely unmoved. "They can call me anytime they want. Tell them I love them, and tell the waiter you'll be using another card." I hung up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't issue ultimatums. I didn't ask him why he had betrayed me. I simply ended the call. For the first time in his adult life, Nathan realized that guilt no longer worked on me. He was standing in a restaurant hallway, holding a useless piece of plastic, facing a bill he couldn't afford, with an audience of 16 people waiting for him to return as the generous provider he had pretended to be. I turned my phone on silent and poured myself a glass of Italian wine. That evening, I opened my suitcase and took out the small, polished wooden box Walter had built for me years ago to hold my travel documents. Inside, resting beneath my old train tickets and our old itinerary, was Walter's brass pocket level. It was heavy, cool to the touch, a symbol of everything he believed in. But beneath the brass level, there was something else. A sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's familiar, blocky handwriting. He must have hidden it there shortly before he died, knowing I would eventually take this trip without him. My hand shook slightly as I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. The letter didn't predict the Mother's Day betrayal. Walter wasn't psychic. He just knew me better than anyone else ever had. He wrote that he worried about me being alone, not because I wasn't capable, but because he knew my heart. You always find a way to excuse bad behavior, Eleanor T. he wrote. You call your one-sided sacrifices keeping the peace. You confuse being needed with being loved. You have spent your entire life as the foundation for other people, letting them build their lives on top of yours. I traced my fingers over his handwriting. The ink was slightly faded. You don't have to stop loving our son, T, the letter continued. But you have to stop proving your love by letting him take things you never agreed to give. A house isn't selfish when it keeps enough strength to stand on its own. Protect your foundation, Eleanor. Even if you have to lock the doors, I wept. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and cried until my ribs ached. But they were not tears of defeat, and they were not tears of mourning. It was the profound, overwhelming relief of finally having someone, the person I loved most in the world, confirm that my discomfort was not selfishness. I wasn't a bad mother for wanting boundaries. I was just a woman trying to keep her house from falling down. I stayed in Italy for 6 more days. I didn't spend it agonizing over Nathan. I walked the cliffs. I drank espresso in crowded piazzas. I ate dinner with June and Rosalie, 2 widows I met who were traveling alone. We laughed so hard one evening that I almost felt guilty for enjoying myself. Then I realized that putting my life on hold, waiting by the phone for Nathan to grant me permission to be part of my own family, didn't honor Walter's memory at all. It just wasted whatever time I had left. When I returned to Pennsylvania, Nathan left 3 voicemails demanding we talk. I agreed to meet him and Claire, but I set the terms. The meeting would happen at my house, at my dining table, no children, no audience. And if I felt it was necessary, my lawyer Helen Brooks would join via speakerphone. They arrived on a Tuesday evening. Nathan walked through my front door, expecting a standard routine. He had rehearsed his role. He expected me to be crying. He expected to offer a highly caveated half apology about how stressed he had been, and he fully expected me to hand the credit card back so the family could return to normal. Claire, however, was unnervingly quiet. She didn't look at me. She stared at her hands. Over the past week, the declined card at the restaurant had forced a reckoning in their household. When Nathan couldn't pay the bill, Vanessa had to step in and cover it, shattering Nathan's illusion of wealth. The fallout had forced Claire to look at their finances. She had discovered that the bonus gifts, the company paid vacations, and the expensive dinners out were all funded by my bank account. Worse, she had found the elder care brochure Nathan had hidden in his home office desk. She was beginning to realize that the man she was married to wasn't just taking advantage of his mother. He was lying to his wife. I sat at the head of the dining table. I placed 4 items neatly on the wood in front of me. First, Walter's project estimating ledger. Second, a printed spreadsheet of expenses broken down into 2 columns. Third, Helen's certified legal letter revoking his power of attorney. And fourth, the thick, legal bound documents establishing the direct pay trust for Mia and Lucy. Nathan looked at the stack of papers, his jaw tight. "Mom, this is insane," he started, immediately trying to take control of the narrative. "You're cutting off your own grandchildren over a miscommunication about a dinner. You're going to let Lucy go without her medication because you're throwing a tantrum?" I didn't raise my voice. I simply slid the trust documents across the table toward him. "I am not cutting off my grandchildren," I said, my voice steady. "If you read that document, you will see that a dedicated trust has been established. It holds enough funds to cover Lucy's medication, Mia's college tuition, and any genuine emergency they might face for the next 5 years. The bills will be paid directly by the trust management firm." Nathan stared at the document, realizing the trap. "The only thing that has changed," I continued, "is that you and Claire can no longer withdraw cash from it. Your children's benefits remain entirely intact. Only your access to my money is gone. You cannot use your daughters as human shields anymore, Nathan. They didn't betray my trust. You did." Nathan's face flushed a deep mottled red. He pushed the trust document away and pointed at the spreadsheet. "You're tracking every dime you ever spent on us," he accused. "You're trying to humiliate me in front of my wife?" "I am not humiliating you," I replied. I tapped the second column on the spreadsheet, the $11,800 in stolen luxuries. "You humiliated yourself in front of 16 people, with my name in your mouth and my card in your pocket. I simply refused to pay for the humiliation a second time." The room went dead silent. Claire finally looked up. She didn't look at me. She looked at her husband. Her eyes were hollow. She reached out and pulled the spreadsheet toward her. She read the line items: the hotel in the Poconos, the anniversary necklace, the expensive dinners with clients. "How much of the life you told me you were providing," Claire asked Nathan, her voice trembling with a quiet, devastating fury, "was actually paid for by your mother?" I didn't answer for him. I didn't need to. I had placed the truth on the table, and now it was their foundation that was cracking. "That is a question you two need to resolve," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "But you will not resolve it using my money." Nathan had no one left to blame. He had built his image as a successful, generous provider using an old woman's money, and he had used that image to maintain power in his marriage. Now, sitting at my dining table, with the ledger open between them, that illusion was dead. The meeting ended without hugs or dramatic apologies. Nathan stood up, his face a mask of wounded pride, and walked out of the house first. Claire didn't immediately follow him. She carefully folded the spreadsheet, placed it in her purse, and then walked out into the evening air. I sat at the head of my table alone. I didn't chase them out to the driveway. I didn't call after them to soften the blow. I simply stood up, carried my teacup to the sink, and washed it. A week later, the doorbell rang. It was Mia. She stood on my porch holding a brown paper bag. Inside was a fresh loaf of sourdough bread, a wedge of cheddar cheese, and a jar of the blackberry jam Walter used to like. It wasn't an expensive gift. It probably cost less than $20. But as she set it on my kitchen counter, I realized it was the first time in 2 years that someone from my family had come to my house without expecting me to finance the visit. We made sandwiches and sat at the island. Mia was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner, Grandma," she confessed, her voice tight. "I grew up hearing them say it all the time. Don't worry about the cost. Just ask Grandma. She'll pay." I knew it wasn't right. I knew Dad was hiding things from Mom. But I was just, I was afraid to start a fight. I reached across the counter and covered her hand with mine. "You are 17 years old, Mia," I told her. "You are not responsible for the choices the adults make, and you do not have to apologize for keeping the peace in a house you can't leave yet." I made sure she understood the reality of the trust fund Helen had set up. "That money is there for you and your sister," I said. "It is not a reward for taking my side, and it can't be taken away if you decide to take your father's side. It belongs to your future, not to our arguments." We spent the rest of the noon looking at the photos I had taken in Italy. We laughed at a picture of me trying to eat a massive plate of squid ink pasta in Naples. The kitchen felt warm again, not because I had purchased someone's presents, but because Mia genuinely wanted to be there. Over the next few months, the stark reality of the new boundaries set in. Nathan and Claire started attending marriage counseling. Without my emergency credit line to cushion their lifestyle, Claire took total control of reviewing the family finances. The expensive dinners stopped. The weekend getaways ceased. Nathan was forced to sell a high-end sports car he had leased the year before, finally living within the means of his actual salary. Interestingly, Vanessa was no longer treated as the reigning matriarch of every family event. Without Nathan's artificially inflated budget to impress her, the grand gestures faded and the dynamic shifted. True to my word, I didn't demand the $11,800 back all at once. Nathan set up an automatic transfer to my checking account for $300 on the first of every month. When the first payment cleared, he didn't wait for me to bring it up. He sent a text message. "The first transfer went through, T," he wrote. Then, a minute later, a second message arrived. "I understand why you did this." Mom, I looked at the text for a long time. I typed my reply carefully. Understanding is the first step. I didn't say, "I forgive you." It wouldn't have been true. I hadn't closed the door on my son permanently, but I wasn't leaving it unlocked for him to walk through whenever he pleased either. Trust wasn't something he could buy back with a perfectly timed apology. He had to rebuild it, brick by brick, through his actions over time. Several months later, in late autumn, I was sitting on my back porch. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the oak trees Walter had planted were turning a brilliant shade of copper. Mia was sitting across from me, helping me organize the last of my printed travel photos into an album. Walter's old project estimating ledger was closed, resting on the side table next to his brass pocket level. Mia picked up a photo of me standing on the cliffs of Sorrento, looking out over the sea. She studied it for a moment, tilting her head. "Grandma, you look different here," she noted softly. "Different how?" I asked, sipping my tea. "I don't know," she smiled. "Lighter, maybe? Like you weren't waiting around for someone to tell you that you were allowed to be happy." I smiled back. I reached into my bag and pulled out a brand new blank ledger of my own. Walter had used his ledger to estimate the cost of building houses. I was using mine to measure what I had learned about living in one. I opened to the first page and picked up my pen. They didn't save a chair for me at the table. I wrote in neat, cursive script, but they still used my name to pay the bill. So I brought my name, along with the money, the voice, and the power that belongs to it. I closed the ledger and placed Walter's heavy brass level flat on top of it. I leaned over and looked at the small glass vial embedded in the metal. The tiny bubble of air rested perfectly, flawlessly, in the dead center of the two black lines. Walter was right. Things can always be rebuilt, as long as you are willing to take a hard look at where the foundation leaned in the first place. My family wasn't completely straight yet. There were still cracks to patch and walls that needed reinforcing. But as I sat on my porch, listening to my granddaughter laugh in the autumn air, I knew one thing for certain. My life was finally balanced.